Kathy Moore, and let's see, this is put on by McDowell 250. I represent Old Fort at McDowell 250, and Doug and Ann here, and Candace somewhere. We're all, is that all the 250 people? Oh, and Roanne? Oh, yeah, Roanne. Did I miss anybody? So we all represent different groups on McDowell's 250 committee, and what we're doing is we're putting on monthly historical talks, and thanks to Rhonda, Rhonda, who I call Rhonda. You know, people have their grown-up name and they have their name they had when they were a kid, and guess what? Rhonda and Catherine, and I'll say, but I'm not telling others. But anyhow, thank goodness for he and his wife writing the book, and for Karen Nielsen right here helping us to format it, and it got published like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we were so happy that we finally got the job done. So John Rhonda Lewis Jr. is going to talk to you guys. So as my introduction to Rhonda, I'll say we're classmates. He's a little younger than me, and he and his wife live in Alabama now, but come to see us every once in a while. And he wanted me to read just this one paragraph in the book as to how they got the name a gem from the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so he says, this man was a gem from the Blue Ridge Mountains. One could easily imagine the unlikely trip of an emerald or ruby from a nearby mountain cove being dislodged by erosion and plunging into a clear crystal branch, only to be whisked away by a large creek, and I don't even have my glasses on, tumbling and rolling along the bottom of a river. A precious stone could be improbable means of a current and channel be swept along to the Atlantic coast and eventually into the international waters. Imagine the parallel journey of a mountain boy with multiple valuable talents being propelled by local and national events and personal circumstances to the point where he would influence national policy, even the outcome of wars, and he was indeed a precious stone and was a product of these blue mountains. Pretty good, right? So I'm going to shut up, and Rhonda, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm really tickled to be here. It's been, I've just been nervous and thrilled about being here for a month. My wife can tell you that. And the chart here, hopefully some of you will stay and talk to us about, these are just some brainstorming things we came up with as classmates, and that we were going to try to do in North Carolina, in Old Fort, to get some business started, things that you might be able to do, hobbies that you might have. Please stay with us and look at those things, some things you might be intrigued by. The Spanish presence in this area that we found out about in Curtis Creek. I can give you some anecdotes and things that I know personally that my daddy found. And my middle name may be Spanish. It is Spanish. I don't know where my great-grandmother got it. That's also my daddy's middle name. But very friendly, green, help. We're hollering for help. And somebody tells you they don't want your money. My daddy said they're probably lying to you. But we really don't. We want your money. We want you to dedicate some time. And one thing that might be interesting is you might want to write your family history. The benefit to you would be for your children and grandchildren to have a really good record of their ancestry and to pass that along for you. We would love a copy of it to go in our town or county libraries for folks to read about. People come here to visit, to recreate, but some of them may want to stop. You know, the grandpas and grandmas are not going to hike 10 miles. They might like to take a book and sit in the library and read. But that'll be all that we'll have to say about that right now. We'll get on to Mr. Daniel W. Adams. He was born in 1872 in Louisiana, which is kind of a surprise for a Blue Ridge Mountain boy that we call him. His mother was from Blue Ridge Mountains in Ashe County, close to where Teresa lives. So she lives real close to something that he built there, actually. And that county is kind of cut off from the rest, up against Virginia and up against Tennessee, and the Blue Ridge Mountains cut it off, and it's kind of separate, it's kind of own entity. But that created some difference. But his mother was from there. His granddad was a medical doctor and accompanied the Cherokee to Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears. So that brings him up in my eyes right there. That's all you have to say about that. But his mother married a Confederate brigadier general after the Civil War. And they lived in Mississippi and then Louisiana. And his daddy died a few months before he was born. She had a sister, a younger sister, who had married a Confederate officer, only a captain. They lived over in Louisiana. Are anybody in here Yankees or Northern? People from our northern states burnt their plantation, but they left the gatehouse. So Colonel Adams' mother went to her sister's plantation to be housed for the birthing in the gatehouse, and he was born in the gatehouse of the Bowie. This man named was Bowie. And then she, with her husband dead, resorted back to North Carolina where her parents were still alive, and you can have protection and the safety and the assurance that they could give there. So they moved back to Western North Carolina, and he was raised there. We have copies of the 1880 census. Daniel Adams is 7 years old. He would have been 7 years old. He would have been in December. If the census taker had come by, he would have been 8. But anyway, in the 1870 census, he got a college degree. He went to a private military academy after attending probably a public school's 8th grade. And 13 or 14 went to a military academy. And it was conducted by a former Confederate officer. He got a degree in Louisiana, in New Orleans, in civil engineering, and also in geology. And he came back to Ashe County, and as far as we can't find any really good literal records, but the family says that he served as a railroad location engineer and as a land surveyor. Land began to increase in price, and you used to go out and describe the tract of land joined on the north by Robinson, joined on the south by Lewis, and on the west by Jones, and east by Smith. Well, you try to guess what the acreage is in there. You know, people want to mathematically compute acreage. They're paying for it by the acre. They want to know what they're buying. So the surveys suddenly had to increase in technology and become better. And so he has this degree in engineering and is able to fulfill that. While he was he helped also locate, we're real sure, the railroad that came from Abingdon, Virginia. It's real hard to get from North Carolina into Ashe County, but came to Jefferson, West Jefferson, to take out iron ore and timber, but they would go through Virginia. And that was an easier route to build, so he probably located that railroad. And which, don't get me started about surveying, we'll be here all night, I love it. But I'm trying to stay away from it. But while he was there, and went up on the ridge that's just east, where's Teresa's house? And I think he always wanted to have a high, cool weather mountain resort for people to resort to in the summertime. He went up there and built a chapel, this Episcopal church. And if you ever want a short vacation of 2 or 3 days, I don't know if all of you can see it, but you at the break it can come up, look at the beautiful inside. And he designed this and built it as a young man. Somebody has come in later and built a fresco painted fresco of the Lord's Supper. They reviews this is like an 1890s photograph, and this is one my precious wife made here while we were up there of the outside. It's a beautiful place. About 200 yards away, 300 yards away, he built an inn. So he wants people to come up to the mountains in the heat of the summer, eastern Virginia, eastern North Carolina. You know what it is there in August and September. Let's go to the mountains, you know. So he evidently wanted to have a resort. He tried about 3 times at different locations to have that. And he built an inn there, and I think today, both these buildings still exist.
Yeah.
And you can go up there, and I think there's a restaurant, maybe a specialty restaurant up there you could actually go and eat. But it looks like he intended people to come, stay for the weekend. You don't have to go back home to go to church. You go to church up here. So he had that covered. He got a really good opportunity. The U.S. Forest Service was created in 1905. Teddy Roosevelt signed the papers, and Colonel Adams went to work almost immediately for them in 1905. The U.S. Forest Service did not own any land, and they were not permitted by the Congress to purchase land with U.S. funds. But they had land out west in Arizona, in Montana, in Minnesota, and later on they found other places. But they knew that these tracts of land were available. They were still in federal ownership. And they said, and there's a lot of beautiful forests. You think about Arizona, what? Rocks, cactus. You get up high, there's beautiful forests. Beautiful conifer forests, especially ponderosa pine, Engelmann spruce, and so forth. So he went out there in 1905. Now this is an amazing thing. The crews went out. We have pictures in the book of his crew. And you can imagine 1905, 1906. It hadn't been that long since Geronimo was captured. You still understand what I'm saying? The man that's with him is Thompson, his companion's a fellow named Thompson. Not quite as tall as Colonel Adams. And every time they're going over, and the view from the family says they're peering over into Apache territory. They come along the road, and there, this is bound to be an adventure for young men. We're going to a place that's foreign to us, and we're going into the unknown. And there's always a firearm. There's a rifle on his shoulder. So they were aware they could be in danger. So they're going out into the Wild West. Now I want to turn quick forward to that back page. A lot of you may know a lot about surveying, and a lot more than I do. But in North Carolina, in the original 13 colonies, Tennessee and Kentucky, most of the surveys are standalone. Until the 1970s, the state organizations got to say, you guys, could you not at least orient the same way? So you got surveys right here in North Cove. I can remember one that says, start at the mouth of Mule Branch at a small walnut tree on the bank of Honeycutt Creek. Then run up the creek, north 22 degrees east, 3.5 poles. Now, what's a pole? 16.5 feet. And without getting overcomplicated, there was a way of computing acreage with poles. 4 poles is a chain, 66 feet. 66 feet, a 66-foot square holds 1/10 of an acre. So you can figure up your area in square chains going off a decimal place. So if you had 250 square chains, you had 25 acres, 25.0 acres. So it was easy for them. Those are standalone meets and bounds surveys, bearings and distances, if you're lucky. And out west, they kind of played their hand. Washington and Jefferson put their heads together. And you remember they had both been surveyors in their younger life. Washington had served for Lord, what was his name? I had it on the top anyway, in Virginia, and even over in Ohio. And he surveyed for this fellow who was an English gentleman. And they said they had the idea, had to be in the back of their head, when we take the land from the Indians, we're not going to have these messy little surveys anymore. We're going to have an orderly way to do this. We're going to account for every acre. There's probably tracts of land up on Honeycutt Creek that never have been described. The state doesn't like that. Why? They're not collecting any taxes. They want it described, they want it owned by you or me, and pay taxes. So they were going to account for every piece of land. Alabama, Mississippi, Ohio, Indiana were the first 4 states surveyed under this system. They were told to go and lay out a baseline, which is basically a line of latitude, and lay out a meridian. Town that lives right straight north of Huntsville. Meridian Street runs straight north, goes through a little bit, it's called Meridianville. Over in East Mississippi, there's a town there called Meridian, Mississippi. That's what they're talking about. It runs right through their town. We start laying out townships. Now, these are not small. These are 6 miles by 6 miles. And you put your best surveyors, best surveying crew, that probably had 6 or 7 underneath the surveyor general. They would lay out these townships and then come back and lay each township out into sections, mile squares. And if you were a settler with the money, you could buy a whole section, 640 acres. And a lot of people bought just a quarter section. As these surveyors were surveying, they laid out. Monument is a physical object that holds the position of the corner. If you have a surveyor come survey your track, make sure he has iron pins or some kind of monument, stone, or something that's physical that you can walk and recognize. Most of the stacks require generally an iron pin, probably rebar, at least half-inch in diameter. A lot of people use 3/4, 18 inches long, and with a plastic cap on top of it. It says John R. Lewis, Registered Land Surveyor, Tennessee number 11276. So they know who did the survey. And if it's wrong, there's your name, there's your number. Okay? So things tightened up quickly about this really important business. But make sure you have a monument and then have meets and bounds that describe that tract of land and the acreage. And you should get a plat, you should get a drawing from the surveyor with a description. All you have to do is take it to the lawyer, there's a transfer of land. Easy job from right there on. But these sections were laid out. This is what I don't understand, the numbering. Look at this. And I have been at this 51 years. And I still have to sit there and draw me a diagram. Look, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 section, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I can remember these because they're in the corner. And the surveyors in our part of the country took a cedar post, only about 4 feet tall, shaved 4 sides of it, and inscribed in it the number of the section. So they would turn part of that and inscribe 12 in it. And they would char the post before they drove it in, and they lasted. Well, this has been 200 years ago. They're all gone now. But this is the framework of our land. I happen to live in township, the townships are numbered, Township 1 South. Tennessee state line is our baseline. Okay, it's the 35th parallel latitude. I live in township number 1 South, range 5 West, and I own some land down here in this second township. But our house is in this township, and the east and west is called a range. And so I'm in section 20, township 1 South, range 5 West. So you go to Huntsville, Tennessee state line, you know about where my property is. You can actually walk there and by these directions. Okay, that's enough. That's what Colonel Adams stepped into in Arizona. Now, he's headed out there with an instrument. This is antique, by the way. This personally belongs to me. And it sits on a little table that's supported by a tripod. You can level the table and you can turn it to orient it and clamp it on. It's called an alidade. And you don't have to record any angles. You can just put a pin in here where your position is on your manuscript and spin around it. And inside is a wonderful little rangefinder, not electronic, optical. And it subtends the surveyor's rod is in feet, tenths of feet, and hundreds of decimals. So I put the bottom crosshair, the stadia hair, on say 3 feet. And it subtends and goes up to 429. Well, if I get to 3, all I did was count red. There's 100 feet, 129 feet from this instrument to the rod. And it's good, one part, about 400. So if I read 400, you would go down the railroad track and I read you 400, be somewhere between 399 and 401. Plotted on the manuscript, and the air is covered by the pencil point. And so you could actually put a bubble, don't have time to talk about this. You put a bubble on the top of that telescope and make a level out of it, and you can shoot elevation also. So, wonderful instrument. I shot a lot of topo. I would have done it for free. I love to do it so much. So, you're free to come and look. If you're looking, you look down in this thing, you're working on the table, and you'll see the crosshairs in there. There'll be 3 horizontal ones and 1 vertical one. Those stadia hair is the distance meter. So, have a real good distance meter and able to locate stuff fairly rapidly. They took the instrument line because they're only having, their chore was when they went out there, and Arizona became state in 1912. A few weeks after New Mexico became state in 1912. I believe Arizona is actually on Valentine's Day. No, New Mexico, Valentine's Day, Arizona's about a month later. Okay, so they're out there surveying, and the government land surveyors who are laying off these sections are still busy in part of the state. So this brand new survey. Colonel Adams is going out there with a set of tables, and these are instructions for surveying those, and these are trig tables. There's sines, cosines, and tangents, but something that not a lot of people probably study anymore. there are logarithms for cosines and sines and tangents. And you have a distance, there are logarithms for numbers. So if you want to multiply the cosine times your distance, you just add the two logs and then get the analog, quick calculation. So they're armed with this book and an instrument like this, and I've got pictures, you can Google it. There's one lady in a U.S. Forest Service uniform, and she's standing with a row of guys, and there's actually a plane table and an alley just like this sitting there in that picture. So instead of having to resurvey, they're just going out and finding these corners that are practically new. And they would find the corners and mark the boundary, enforce the boundary, which means we may have poachers that are coming in and cutting U.S. property for timber, but they're going to stop that. They have the power to enforce that and build roads for fire protection and also to harvest timber. And they built this crew that went out there. And they're not just currently out there were lots of them. They created 6 national forests in Arizona in 3 years. That's light speed. That's amazing speed. So come take a look at this book. There's some amazing information. In Alabama and Mississippi, Ohio and Indiana, the instructions were go and lay out a baseline and a meridian, start laying off sections. No regard to, hey, when we go 6 miles west, you know what happens to a north line? It converges. Didn't even give them any instructions. They just laying out. They're laying out townships. As the process evolved, Kansas, Nebraska, those further west states became a lot more technical and corrected for that. So there are better surveys done out there with those newer states in the system. But all they were trying to do, recover corners, mark the boundary, enforce the boundary, and build roads. Okay, that pretty well covered that. I guess that's about all the time that I have to show that. This is what I've stated, there were their goals, and they had 6 national forests ready in 3 years. He comes back to Arkansas. The federal government gets to look in there. Tracts of land in Arkansas, western Arkansas, in the Ozarks, and in the Washita Mountains that haven't ever been homesteaded. And so they said, well, we can create a national forest there. Problem is, you come back to Arkansas, and the age of your surveys by the geologist surveys laid out the sections is now 70 years old. You begin to lose stuff. Stuff begins to rot, stuff begins to decay. The encroachment by the neighbors is a lot more prevalent, and they probably have a stronger political hold on it. So he transfers back in 1908 to Arkansas. Still federally owned land, more difficult in Arizona. The geolo surveys are 70 years old and a lot of the corners have been lost. This is now known as the Washita National Forest. It was originally called the Arkansas National Forest. And they didn't like the name National Forest after state, so they changed that habit and made this, the Washita River runs a beautiful river. While he was there, he wrote this book at the request of Gifford Pinchot, who was the original director of the Forest Service. And I want you, this is my copy. Sheila has pages from this book in her informal files, cardboard boxes and files and so forth, but I never found a whole. There was a private U.S. Forest Service retiree archives in Durham, and they sent us they scanned it. Kathy sent you a copy, and then you sent me a copy. But Linda, my wife here, kept searching, and on Amazon, in London, England, they're still printing this book. I want you to come take a look at it. A lot of good inventions that he did to protect forests from fire. One of the main things, and I put this is a green star, is he invented the location of fires using a forest fire tower. Now, triangulation's been around since the Greeks, probably, you know. You could take this instrument right here and take 2 men, or take the same alley and plane table, and somebody's over on Jack's Mountain, over at Bethlehem Community, firing artillery shells at your boys. You get where you can see the report of that fire and go down the way and find another place. I can locate where he is with that instrument. And set up your gun. You know, you play a cat and mouse game. They know what you're doing too. But you can move your howitzer and I can line you up. and then go back to my original statement, say, you need to add about 50 yards of powder, blow the thing out of the ground. So that's the power of triangulation. But Colonel Adams came up with a permanent, fixed, elevated tower, simplified to be able to locate fires. And that's a picture. I know some of you are blocked. That's the actual photograph. Let me talk to this just a little bit. This is a real photograph, and if you look real close, here's a telephone line, and telephone line's leaving. Colonel Adams is on top, and he's using a heliotrope. He's sending Morse code for information that he's collecting. The signing mechanism is right here, and you have a place where you've housed the place and protected the equipment. On this yard arm up here, I think it probably shows, maybe flip the chart there. I'm going to show you a little bit about it. This is a piece of work. There it is, okay. You'll see some of the detail on here. One of the things about this is that if you couldn't use your telephone lines, or you couldn't signal the sun's not there, he had a system of lanyards and lanterns where he could pull up and he could send a number 2, 25 miles away with binoculars. So you're sending the information to a local place where they can coordinate. You take 2 towers and cut the fire in, you know where the fire is. And you're going to send your firefighting crews to that location. Their living quarters here probably use this as the main living quarters, and this is another bedroom. There are stairs, and then a ladder to get up here to this crow's nest where Colonel Adams is standing. And you communicate from up here. Your sighting is here, and I've drawn a miniature thing of I call it a squirrel cage. Notice they're collecting the water out of their gutters, stored in a wooden barrel. This thing starts about 5 feet off the ground, and I'm not real sure. If you look at the photograph, I think some of it may be built on top of stumps. Guilford Pinchot wouldn't pay for the building of the fire tower, so Colonel Adams funded it out of his own pocket. And then when Pinchot saw the value that they were able to locate the fires real quickly, then they got funded. The squirrel cage. Colonel Adams stated in his book, I don't want to have to train a man in engineering, I want to pull somebody out of the plow field. He goes by here, let's say your eye was here and you're looking through the plumb bob that's hanging from the center of the tower, line it with the fire, and just give me the number of the wire. These were wires that were tightened, had bolts and wing nuts where you could tension that wire and keep it straight. So, hey, I see a fire. Okay, get down there, and you don't have to turn anything, you don't have to be able to run a transit or anything. Just line the fire with the plumb bob and read the number on the wire and call it to me. I get another fire station over here on the mountain 20 miles away, and they're cutting it in 2. Now we've got the fire located. Very simply, this was modified in the next few years, made better. They actually put a map. So the guy right here may be fairly familiar with the terrain. He looks over here and says, I know the name of that mountain. I know this gap. That may be Callaway Gap. You know where Callaway Gap is? And the fire is just south of Callaway Gap. You could get people on the way right then because people recognize when they put them out in the center here, and they had a blade that went across like this alligator, except it was hollow in the middle. It had 2 1-inch spacings, and you could see the map in between. So you're actually looking at the topo map of the terrain. Using the system, detect the fire, okay, and then communicate the 2 azimuths, and possibly 3, to the fire. That gets it located. And then you dispatch the people to go fight it. And he got a letter back in 1947 where they had tables of data over the loss of acreage to fire, forest fires, and what would have been lost. And we're talking about 90% saved. Tremendous savings. The system's success was that he got to build a whole network. You know, you don't just go throw one of these up. It takes a while to build it. And then he was asked to write, this is called Bulletin number 113. And that's what this is, by Pinchot. There's a lot of different things for fighting fire in there besides the fire tower. And so they had saved 90% of probably what would have been burned. They sent him this letter in 1947 showing the success. He was already retired from the Forest Service at that time. Don't you know that was a very good thing to think about? Oh, wow, this worked out. It really worked good. Okay. Anyway, we'll continue with the story of Colonel Adams. In 1911, the Congress passed the Weeks Act. This has a lot to do with us here. Colonel Adams came back from Arkansas after having written this pamphlet, and this pamphlet went not only over the United States, but around the world. There are people in Australia have copies of this thing. And so it became very popular. So he's worldwide known for this pamphlet just there. Came back, and the Congress said we can have some funds to buy lands east of the United States, just about all privately owned, except for probably federal cemeteries. You know, there's federal cemeteries at Chattanooga and Arlington, but most of the land is owned by private ownership. And of course, we had folks in the 1870s, 1880s were getting to the point saying, we're cutting too much of our forest, you know, we're wasting stuff. Let's start conserving it a little bit. Some wanted to have preservation like the Smoky Mountain. We won't cut anything again. Others wanted to manage the forest like a crop. We'll use it very judiciously and wisely so we have the products that we need from the forest and we'll preserve them. Which I love that idea. The idea of, you know, having your cake and eating it too. Maybe we can eat the cake and then a few years later we got it again. That's a good prospect. And if you protect it, not let the topsoil erode, then you have forest again. Curtis Creek is a perfect example. They had a log flume up there, which my grandpa Silver probably helped build. Logs were coming out of Curtis Creek and dumping off up here just past what I used to call, what is the name of the place, Oriole? Call it the name of it now. And Uncle Listenberry Silver was whatever you call those guys that had the steel spike boots. And he would be in that pond straightening the logs out to go up on the conveyor belt to go through the sawing. So they worked in that. So that forest, and we thought as kids was primeval forest. Curtis Creek, beautiful trout stream, cold water, I learned to swim in it. That had been cut. And now look at it. You know, what a beautiful place we have. What a beautiful place to resort to. And all that we have, the benefits that come out. So Daniel W. Adams used to come back to Western North Carolina, office in or somewhere near Asheville. He goes to Virginia to buy a tract of land. And up at West Augusta, which is, what's the name of the place where Woodrow Wilson was raised? Staunton. His father was, y'all may not know this, I cannot keep my mind from going. His father was a Presbyterian minister. Got a big chance to get a high raise and pay to come to Atlanta. So they moved the family, but his boyhood years were spent there in Staunton. That's the county seat. Go west from there, you'll come to West Augusta. I think the county is named Augusta County. And so he meets Miss Cross. That's the grandmother of the Adamses. So while he's here with the Forest Service, he comes back to North Carolina, buys the Curtis Creek property, 8,000 plus acres from the Burke and McDowell County Lumber Company. And the plaque says so up on the parkway, and it's just a matter of fact that that's what happened. And he discovers, trying to buy tracts of land, the Catawba Fall. We're so familiar with that. Go up the left valley and you'll go to it, you know. And he tried to get the Forest Service to buy it. And evidently they wanted the Pisgah National Forest to kind of run in this part of it from that highway right there, US 70, across the mountains over to Burnsville, and that they kind of limits of it. This was a little bit south. Well, for whatever reason, they didn't want to buy it. So Colonel Adams took out his own savings and he bought the property up there, which lends itself to further things in his life. This is some quick moving years here. From 1913 to 1916, he resigns the Forest Service. He's only been there 9 or 10 years. He marries, he buys the house, and by the way, we're hoping that gets to be turned into a semi. Sheila's had to live at 2 of her buildings, her dwellings were destroyed by the flood. But that's her grandfather's house. The pictures here on the right. This one at the bottom is my wife made lately. I think the one on top is from about 1965. So he buys a house, he buys the Falls property, they start a family, and Binky, our beloved Binky, was born in 1914, and he builds a new water system. The water system from Old Fort was basically a spring up on Spring Street. There was a lot of cholera in the town, it was probably contaminated. Colonel Adams comes in and builds the Jarrett Creek Reservoir, and then the stories about the right-of-way that I told you. And so we have the water system that lasted for so long. At the school, between the junior high school and the elementary school, you remember the big fountain? Ran continuously. You just go up, coming off of baseball field, football field, running back to class. What do? Is stop by there. It's running all the time, good water. You know, and so that was a system that was used for many, many years here in Old Fort. All right. He's just started a family, and in just a little more than a year, World War I breaks out. It was called the Great. They didn't know there was going to be a second World War. They actually called it World War I war to end all war. Well, we know it wasn't. So, but he volunteers after the sinking of the Lusitania by the Germans. He volunteered in 1917. He goes to officer candidate school. And remember, he's had all this training as a teenager in military school. So very quickly, in a few months, he's a lieutenant colonel. You know, following right in the steps of his granddad and those other, his dad and granddad. So he trains American natives, started putting Indians, and while he was out there in Arkansas backs up on the west side to Oklahoma, Indian territory, in 1906. And so our national forests are joiners to Cherokee property and Choctaw property. They undoubtedly met, you know, discussing or arguing about boundary, you know, where's the state line, and this is ours and that is yours. And he hunted on their property and visited. He actually got to visit, told me, and you'll read in the book about children coming along the street and going into his office up here. That's me. and I can just imagine, here comes this 8-year-old kid, and he's in there doing this number right here, got his hat on. And I come in the door and he does this. And said, there comes that kid again, probably. But anyway, he would wake up and he would talk to me about his life. And that's where I got a lot of these stories. He told me when I was a kid, and Mother would let me off at the barbershop, get your hair cut every 4 weeks, every 4 Saturday. She would go to John's Market and buy groceries. Well, if I got my hair done real quick, and it cost a lot, it was like 50 cents. 75 cents for a flat top. How about that? I get done quickly. I go into Colonel Island's office and sit down. He had arrowheads, which fascinated me. And so we talked about his life, but he met Geronimo while he was out in Oklahoma. So I knew a man who knew Geronimo. And actually shook hands with him and sat down and talked with him. Okay, he trains Native Americans and takes a unit to France. And you know what my attitude, you know the treatment of the trailatiers and all that. If you came to me and were trying to, this is what a negotiator was, and you recruited me going to the U.S. Army to go fight in a foreign war, what would you have said? I would say not only no, but no. Okay? And so he talked them into coming and training with him, and then they went together to France. Well, on the edges of this trench warfare in the Argonne Forest, they were able to speak Choctaw and Cherokee. And if you go to, a lot of y'all probably visited Europe, everybody over there speaks English. They speak better English in Switzerland than I do. And I lost my bags one time and went up and tried to talk in German to the man at Zurich airport, and he said, oh, I was speaking to him in German, trying to do my best job. He said, oh, you mean your bags are lost? I said, exactly. So anyway, you talk in English, the Germans understand you. You talk in French, the Germans understand that. I know a lady over there in Switzerland speaks 5 different languages fluently. So if you try to give commands by voice out there in the field, everybody understands what you're doing. But if you say it in Cherokee or Choctaw, they don't understand. So you can take 50 men or 100 men on the right flank and go attack that right flank. They don't know what you've said. And General John J. Pershing, when they got all the troops back from France, in 1920 they had a big convention in St. Louis, and he made a speech, and he said, the Cherokee and Choctaw code talkers, see, we didn't even know the word code talker. I'd never heard about this. I'd heard about the Navajo, World War II, and the Japanese. He said, he credited them for cutting the Germans' throat. They had to sign armistice. They were facing that. The Americans on the front lines were encroaching on them, and we had 1 million troops over there at one time. They knew America was just continuing to push the troops, so they signed an armistice. And I put it on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, and we still celebrate that on November 11th. They won't change it back to the weekend. He returns to America in December. He'd been wounded slightly, so he got to come back a little bit early. The rest of his troops stayed there till April of 1919. Comes back to Old Fort, now the Roaring Twenties. You think about America, okay, we've solved some of the world's problems. A League of Nations has been created. There's a lot of hope in the world. And there's a lot of hope for business in the United States. Everybody's euphoric. What is that word? They're happy, they're glad to be an American. And so they start investing money like crazy. And so Colonel Adams is getting his stuff in order too. So they build a grist mill at the old Sycamore Mill up on Commerce Street. My daddy worked there as a boy with Pa Silver, and they ground the corn. And we still have in the family somewhere, Joe, a paddle that was made just like a 1x8 that had a slope on the bottom, and it had a place for your fingers and your thumb, and you stuck it in the cornmeal and pulled out a very good measurement. Shake it 1 pound. So you get 5 of those, it's 5 pounds. Shake it on the scale, add a little bit, take a little bit off. So Grandpa Silver ran the grist mill for Colonel Adams, and there's a chapter about the Silver family in the book. Joe will be interested especially in that. And so he built that. He was seeking mines and options on mines over in Mitchell and Yancey County. And one of the things about this, during those Depression years, my daddy was too young to go to the Civilian Conservation Corps. But Colonel Adams would hire a lot of young boys in the summer months to help him establish mines. And they were digging feldspar and mica and maybe some rare gems. And so he also was getting and negotiating oil lands in Texarkana, right there on the Texas-Arkansas border, of course. Okay, surviving the 1930s. Of course, this was a depression. Business came along, the depression came along, and the euphoria of the 1920s was over. People were losing money. They were going to invest. They're like, I'm going to buy $100,000 worth of stock, and didn't have a dime to back it up. And then when it started crashing, people started asking for their money. People were jumping out of skyscrapers. And so in 1929, the stock market collapsed, threw the country into the Deep Depression, and people didn't want to hire. I think the unemployment rate at one time was over 25%. And so during this time, he planned a resort. He wanted, like I said, he wanted to have a resort, a high mountain resort, get up in the cool air, to take people from the home place up here, where it was a hotel or club, and ride horseback up to the Catawba Falls and get up higher and where it was cooler. That was a bad time as far as business to try to get that started. The New Deal started, of course, with Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1930s. I worked for the TVA, which was a New Deal project. The Civilian Conservation Corps was a New Deal project, and the WPA, which many of your fathers probably worked for, the WPA. But the Depression lingered. Actually, what solved the Depression for the United States was World War II. You started taking all the men, putting them in the service. Rosa the Riveter went to work at Newport News and other places, building armament. So he put the whole country back to work, trying to get ready for war. The world descends into war, and the demand for oil to drive all this machinery just went up and up and up. So the demand for oil at Texarkana oil was high. Colonel Adams saw the threat that Germany was posing to the world. And I told you about this before, that German-American families in the United States had felt like Germany had got a bad deal in the treaty that solved World War I. They had to give up the old Alsace-Lorraine territory, and they had to pay heavy retribution to England and to France. And as we were suffering the Depression, Germany was suffering a deeper depression. It made people mad, like Hitler. It made some people in the United States with German-American surnames. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. You may have family that was in that, but there were camps that were about 50 of them in the United States for young teenage boys. If you would come to the camp, now you don't have a lot of athletic equipment, and you say Heil Hitler and you're blonde-headed and blue-eyed, you can stay at the camp all summer. And you'll have plenty of food, you'll have the best baseball equipment, a swimming pool, a tennis court, blah, blah, blah. And all you have to do is So you just wonder what, and there was one about 4 miles to the southeast. I was happened to be picking apples with my daddy one day, and I saw these foundations. They were they were octagon foundation, concrete, in the orchard. Oh, I quizzed the kids, Daddy, what are those? He said, the foundation for dormitories. I said, dormitories for what? He said, for young German-American recruits. And they would walk on the parade field out there with an American flag and a swastika side by side. Scary business, right? I don't know what dissolved that. If people rose up and said, stop that. I really don't know what dissolved it, but there were 50 of them in the United States, and one was on Crooked Creek. Okay, so Colonel Adams, see that southwestern sharpshooter, he was out, you remember the movie Blazing Saddles? And Harvey Korman was going to get all the bad guys in the whole world. There were Nazi soldiers there before there were Nazi soldiers. We're going to stop this Rock Ridge, the railroad from coming through Rock Ridge, you know. And they had all the bad guys, you know, the mean guys, terrorists and everything else to try to stop those people from building that railroad. Well, those things were part, I guess some people thought about the Southwest sharpshooters, is Colonel Adams wanted to have a militia ready as a home guard. And unspoken, but you kind of think that some of his relatives and some of the people that knew about all the things he accomplished said, Colonel Adams, get out of that little organization. We have important work for you in Washington. And so he's summoned to come to Washington. He speeds up his production in the oil and mines. Hitler invades Poland in 1939. England then declares war. This was after they had tried to appease Germany. Said, oh, you want part of Czechoslovakia? A lot of people in Czechoslovakia speak German. Just take it. Maybe you'll be satisfied with that. Oh, no. They attacked Poland the next year. So England and France declared war against Germany. The U.S. is only using supply ships. And just like in World War I, the Lusitania, the Germans would sink some of our supply ships. So Colonel Adams is summoned to D.C. And one of the things you may not know, underneath the Capitol in Washington, D.C. is honeycombed with tunnels and parking lots, deep, to protect the congressmen in case they have to escape a direct attack. And so he was summoned there because he was an expert geologist and an expert in underground excavation. Now there's some things that, I don't know, they may still be classified, but some of the things that he did was to, besides defending our own country, was to advise the Allies, England, and mostly England. One of the things you may not know, we've always heard about the White Cliffs of Dover. The White Cliffs of Dover, that you can see from France, was just 17, people swimming it all the time. Only about 19 miles from France. That's where the Channel goes through. Well, it's a fortress. It is tunneled. And I have friends that have visited last summer. And it is tunneled so you can set artillery up and protect your people there. And a lot of shells over on German warships trying to go through the English Channel. You have to sail all the way around England. You're not going through the English Channel. So they did that. Not only that, Gibraltar. We've always heard about the Rock of Gibraltar. Well, the Brits had owned Gibraltar right there on the tip of Spain from about the 1500s. And they protected it from Spain by setting up artillery and aiming it and keeping it in view toward Spain. So Spain never did really try to take it back. But the Brits had already carved some tunnels to resupply their artillery from the Atlantic side, not the Mediterranean side. Well, Colonel Adams advises them to go in there. They build 26 additional miles of tunnels in Gibraltar. 26 miles. And there are barracks, there are hospitals, there are desalination plants for fresh water, water storage, and it said they could house 16,000 troops and supply them and keep them supplied for 16 months. So you got a fortress there. One of the things he advised them about was to bring the debris. And only in about 1953, these modern Swiss augers that carve tunnels that we're used to seeing now, that's not always been. A lot of times people dug round holes, but they would have scaffolds with men with jackhammers basically driving holes and then blowing the perimeter out with dynamite or nitroglycerin, and then the core would fall down, and you empty that. So he had bulldozers pushing that debris into vertical channels and a conveyor belt waiting downstairs, and they started distributing that stuff out into the Atlantic. They built 2 jetties so that supply ships could come up and resupply Gibraltar. And then there's a jet port there now that's probably a mile long. You can land a jumbo jet there. And people, you talk to people in the Navy who've been there. Alan Jones didn't get to come here tonight. He said, yeah, it's there. And so they built it out of the debris that came from the tunnels. And you can imagine what Hitler would have done if he got control of Gibraltar. Cut off the Mediterranean from the Atlantic. You got control of North Africa and every place else by water. So, you can Google this right here about the Aleutian Islands. Trying to fight the Japanese, they dug underground hangars in the Aleutian Islands. I know people in the Army who said, I asked about it, I couldn't get it on Google. They said in Google, it's rumored that there are underground hangars in the Aleutians. We do not know. But there are airfields there, and there are bunkers. But a fellow in the Army that I know personally said, yeah, there's an underground hangar there. So they've got fighting planes in the Aleutian Islands ready to go. Hot war turns into a Cold War. This is where we start fighting Germans and we start fighting Red Chinese and Russians in a psychological war mainly. Of course, we had the Korean conflict. But in the meantime, radar had been invented by the Brits because they were getting blitzkrieg to death. So before those German planes could come over from France or from Germany, they could be picked up by the Brits. They get their anti-aircraft ready and get their boys into the Royal Aircraft into the air and shoot them down. They just confounded Hitler, because they were able to do that. But we didn't develop, they're on the nose of every plane now, right? Got radar all over the coast. At that time, we didn't have that in 1945. So Colonel Adams advised, let's use the fire towers on the coast to look out for Russian subs and planes. And they used that. There's a letter from him to Mr. Forstall, who was the Secretary of Defense. We called him Secretary of War. Again, called him Secretary of War at one time, and then we changed that to Secretary of Defense, and now, what's his name? That's Trump's Secretary. Yeah, Pete, right? And he is the Secretary of War. But anyway, Forstall was there in the late 1940s. And Forstall is the one you may remember got involved a little bit with wanting the government to do more about investigating UFOs, and he fell from about 5 stories in a hotel in Washington, D.C. A lot of people say he was defenestrated. Defenestrated is a great word. I love a great word. Fenêtre, remember this, Judy and Teresa, from a French class. Fenêtre is French for window. Okay, if you defenestrate somebody, you throw them out the window. That's an English word. So anyway, we think that Forstall was probably, but Colonel Adams wrote him, and what is the basic thing, he qualified himself in the things he'd done. He said, don't go create a new bureaucracy. Take the boys that already know how to do this technology and let them do the job. That was and there's a copy of the letter up at Sheila's house. Oh yeah, he documented stuff, wrote letters to people, and kept just records. This book could be twice as thick. I feel like I've got probably 60% of the information, and there's details of the information that I do have that I was not able to complete. I couldn't find drawings of how did I leave out the hydro plant? I left out the hydro plant up on Catawba Falls. We'll get to it if you want to talk about it, but Colonel Adams built a hydro plant, collected water above the falls and Chestnut Fork, and brought water down through a turbine. The upper powerhouse, you'll walk right by it as you go to the falls. It's a dilapidated concrete structure that's kind of falling apart. He collected the water in a little dam there, which he's sitting on the dam right there. And there's water, the flume that's leaving there is going downstream, and it'd go about a half mile and drop water through another 300 feet through another turbine in the lower powerhouse, which is just above the parking lot on the Catawba River Road. Sorry about that. I meant to cover that thoroughly. You could still find pieces of the hydro plant up there. The bands that connected the wooden flume, which was circular, 22 inches in diameter, can you imagine? But 2 men were able to carry a 10-foot section and lay it in place. Can you imagine taking a steel pipe that every 10 feet weighs 1,000 pounds and trying to muscle it up that slope over there? You have to have cranes and stuff like that to do it. So we had a hydro plant here in 04 that produced electricity. And it was not a lot of electricity, but it was enough for every household to probably have 3 or 4 100-watt bulbs. It only had about 150 customers. So when we got into this Cold War, he wanted to design, because of the fallout, wanted people to have fallout shelters, and they dug one up here behind the home place in the hillside up there above the house. He returns to Old Fort in the early 1950s, and this is where I got to know him. I met him sometime before my 4th birthday. And I think my older sister was in school, and at the Old Fort School, and Mary was just a toddler, and we went up there, and he and Miss Adams just treated us so graciously. We just loved to go up there. But he opened his Main Street office just east of where the barbershop was, and then that's where he would greet visitors and tell them about his life. And then one of the last things that he was involved in was the move US 70 from going up here, and you take the curve to the right, go up Mill Creek, go up Swannanoa Creek, and the Royal Gorge to Ridgecrest, moved it across Young's Ridge over into the Catawba River Basin, and go up it. That's where the interstate is now. That was. And he wanted to build a resort up there. If you remember, some of you may remember, there were bulldozed trails out around some of those tops. He wanted to have a store and a resort there. But I think the state talked him out of it because of the speed of the vehicles. You can't make a lot of speed coming down US 70. You remember you were doing this number, 35 miles an hour roughly. People coming off there today, but if you don't control them at 70, you know. But then he passed away in 1957, just a couple of months before he would be 85. So that's just hitting the top of the waves, even in this book. You can read for yourself a lot of the detail there, and like I said, if I probably maybe have 60%, I'm sad, but we were about to lose that. Sheila Adams passed away and I passed away. Most of the story is lost unless those files are incomplete, they're not organized. You got to go in and kind of know where you're going. You know, how do you find your way to Kentucky, Daniel Boone? You got to follow your nose. You got to know kind of where you're going. That's your time. I appreciate it.